entering into the second sermon in a series on as we head into Easter. And we're hearing Jesus as he speaks from the cross. So we're going to continue listening to that. But before I do, when I have a good thing and it works, I keep coming back to it. So I know that I did this joke last week, but forgive me, it's just too good. We have no problem with this guy breaking into our homes. You know that? No one cares if this guy sneaks in through a weird orifice. That's fine for him to come into our homes and tracksuit around and eat our cookies. And nobody is creeped out by the fact that he sees you when you're sleeping. I'm sorry, but that's really creepy. He knows that I'm awake. Now I'm awake all the time. But no one thinks that's creepy but this. I'm with you, kid. In fact, watch the kids as we go, because that guy looks a little startled. Frankly, if my parents put me on that kid's lap, I would be filing for emancipation, because that's creepy, but what? What is coming out of that thing's face? It looks like the face hugger from Alien, man. And it gets into, that Easter bunny needs therapy. He needs someone to talk to him about his issue. Maybe if we just and look at the kid. But maybe if we put a really happy, smiley face, it wouldn't be creepy. Oh, yes, it would. It would be very creepy. Anyway, that's fun for me. And I'm not done. There's more Easter bunnies. It doesn't matter what you do with the Easter bunny. He's always spooky. But of course, Easter's not about the Easter bunny. It's about this wondrous moment. The moment when everything changed. Everything changed. When the disaster had happened and humanity had done its worst, God did His very best. When the Savior had been slain and there was no hope, and the hope of the world died, the hope didn't die. And God was able to raise from the dead the hope of the world. Which means that there is hope no matter where you are. And hope doesn't die. It springs eternal because it springs from God. So wherever you are and whatever has happened and whatever is going on, there is reason to hope. And I look out at some folks among us and I know some of you are hurting. I know some of you are in pain and some of you have lost sight of hope. Glad you came here. Walk with us. Let us carry you through the dark, because Easter was a dark time. It was in the darkness. While it was still dark, He rose. And we will fix our eyes on hope and carry you through it. Keep coming here. Because this is the greatest thing that has ever happened, ever. But of course, in order to get to the greatest thing that ever happened, ever, we have to pass through the worst thing that ever happened, ever. I mean, of course, because of what God did with it, it is the most wondrous thing, too. It is amazingly wonderful where the blood was spilled, where it was shed to rescue broken sinners like me. But here the hope of the world died. And as He died, He spoke. Remember that Jesus invites us to nothing less than this. If you will be His disciple, He says, then take up your cross. Follow me. Well, taking up your cross, He wasn't, for us, that's like, what is a cross? When have any of us seen it? But anyone who was around when He was there had certainly seen crosses. They knew the horror of what Jesus had invited them to. And certainly when it comes to this moment, they see that He's not kidding. On the cross, Jesus does some of His most profound teaching. The stuff that is really at the heart of the gospel is found right here, at the heart of the gospel moment. when the wonder of what's happening for us, He's teaching us through that. He's rescuing us, He's saving us, but if we will fix our eyes upon Him, we will see profound gospel teaching. Last week, we looked at the truth that Jesus spoke forgiveness from the cross. While they were putting Him there, He prayed for their forgiveness. And His wondrous acceptance of the unacceptable thief. All of that is teaching His people, those who follow Him. What He spoke from the cross teaches us that we also must forgive one another. And we must forgive it all. And by one another, I mean obviously those who are gathered here. Yes. And there are times when I'd be like, well, I don't know how I'd handle that if I were you. And it would be far from me to say, well, you ought to forgive that. But it's not me saying it, is it? It's the Christ who lays this mandate upon us. If you will follow me, then you come to my cross and you see not only your forgiveness secured, but the example of forgiveness that you are expected to follow. That while the pain is still in you, because He's hurting when He does this. It's not after He's processed it. It's not after He's worked through it. It's while it's happening. He prays forgiveness. So you must also forgive. This week we look at trust. We see Jesus' example of how does He work with God in the very worst day of His life. Anybody want to argue with me about that? You think maybe the crucifixion is the worst thing that happened to Jesus? I mean, from His perspective, do you think He had a worse day? I'm sure He woke up sometimes and the sky was a little gray, and that was kind of a hard day. It was raining. Bummer, right? I don't think He had a worse day than when they drove nails through His hands and feet. How did He continue to trust God in dreadful circumstances? The thing is, that's a question for us, isn't it? How do I hang on to my faith when things get really hard? This is a theme I come back to again and again and again because my life has often been really, really hard. Honestly, since I married that woman, it's been a lot better. God has made my life so much better, such that the pre-Ashley days sometimes feel like kind of a bad dream that I've woken up from. But I can still remember. I can remember my childhood. I can remember a lot of... It was hard. How do you hang on to faith in hard times when terrible things are happening? And when I picked these pictures, I looked for, grieving people and sad people. The funny thing is that these are all really dramatic, aren't they? It's funny, but it doesn't tend to take that to challenge our faith, does it? I mean, this certainly comes as challenge to our faith. When we are in the moment of collapse, when we're in free fall, when the foundation stones we stood on that we thought were solid are suddenly taken like a trap door from beneath our feet, and we tumble and we don't know when we're going to land. That's hard. But I think sometimes we almost do better in those moments than we do in the small, trivial ones. The little ones. The ones that come not just in a galactically bad day kind of thing, but the coworker that's mean. Do I hang on to my discipleship in the hard challenge? Obviously I want to hang on to it when I'm sitting there going, what? How do I get through this? But can I hang on to it in the small moments that don't feel real small at the time, but 6 months later I know them for what they were? Do I hang on to my discipleship? Am I able to forgive them? And am I able to love then? Am I able to behave myself well then? Because our obedience and our faith are linked. You won't be obedient unless you're faithful. But if you scrap obedience and you give up on that, it'll corrode your faith as well. They're like two sides of a coin. Christian behavior and Christian faithfulness go together. And if you are not living faithfully and doing what Jesus says when it's hard, you'll find yourself believing less and less. How do I hang on to my trust in God when the challenge comes? As we look at Jesus on the cross, we see Him doing just that. Now, this is one response. To shake your fist at heaven, to give it all up. There are people that do that. When the crisis comes and it lands on them, they walk away. When things get hard, they give up. When things get challenging, have you seen this? You know, when the pain really comes and it's really overwhelming, and they go, you know what, a good God wouldn't have let that happen to me, and they give up. Let me ask you something. Did God love Jesus or not? Then in this world, bad things happen to people God loves. And if it happened to the Son of God Himself, do you think that you're somehow better than Him, that you should somehow be accepted from that rule? If something as bad as the cross should happen to Him, it'll happen to you too. I don't say that to go, hey, you know what, life is terrible, so good news, huh? I say that to get you ready so that you don't do this. Because He didn't do this. Don't give up and shake your fist. Instead, you look to your perfect example and you watch what He does. So what does He do? Well, when Jesus is on the cross in the worst day of His life, listen to His words. At about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? You know, there's a whole interpretation that has grown up around this about the abandonment of Jesus at this moment. And that on the cross, God turned His back on Jesus, and that's treated with the kind of sacrosanct approach that the Scripture itself is treated. I wish to mildly challenge that, if I might. You know, the idea that God can't be around sin is just ludicrous. You continue to exist when you sin, right? And God's around when you do it. Because God sustains your existence. The idea that the Father can't be near sin isn't ever actually said anywhere in Scripture. It's something that we say a lot, but it's not actually said. And the reason I do that gentle challenge is because I think sometimes it clouds what's actually going on here. What Jesus, I think, is actually doing, because there is such a teaching, such a powerful teaching from Jesus for how to pass through the worst day of your life. Because He's in the middle of it. And what does He cry out? He cries out these words, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Which incidentally, the people who heard it had no idea what He said. You know, they said, well, He's calling for Elijah. Let's take care of him somehow. Remember that? And He cries this out, which means, I will suggest, He didn't yell this one quite as loudly as the others did. People misheard it. People didn't mishear most of what He said, but people didn't understand what He says here, which means that Jesus says this for Himself. This is a moment of prayer. And what kind of prayer? Well, folks, He's quoting, oh goodness, that's a mess. He's quoting Psalm 22 as He says this. Do you recognize the words there? My God, why have you forsaken me? It's the initial words of Psalm 22. This is a powerful song, and we actually see this, and we hear the echoes of the cross in Psalm 22, and unfortunately, sometimes that's all we hear in Psalm 22. Because it's so amazing. You know, it says things like, they have pierced my hands and feet. They gamble for my clothes. I mean, it's full of stuff from the cross. So it's so full of those echoes that we don't pay attention to how would people have used it before the cross. In fact, how would Jesus have used it on the cross. Because by saying these few words, he's running through this whole psalm in his mind. What Jesus is doing is he's experiencing the very common experience of, but wait a minute, this hurts. He's experiencing the reality that in this world, sometimes God's love is hard to see. God's love is hard to find. That psalm sings that reality, and it sings it very well. It remembers the time when God is so obvious, but it also remembers that I am a worm and not a man, and trouble is everywhere, and there is no one to help. Please don't be far away from me right now. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever been at the moment in your own heart where God felt distant, and you knew down deep inside, you knew that He wasn't because your theology told you that? But your experience was of a distant, faraway God, where you felt abandoned, where you felt alone. That's what that psalm is about. It's about feeling alone in hard times. It's about feeling helpless and hopeless. It's about crying out to God, don't leave me. Please, I'm hurting. Please be close to me. Help me through this. This is awful and it's hard. And I'm hurting. Please be near to me. That is a common human experience. Live long enough, and you'll be there. And if you've lived long enough, you can probably remember when you were. So what is Jesus doing by quoting that? He's crying out here, I'm with you. I'm with you. I feel what you feel. I know what it is to feel the estrangement. In this world, even the best of us will feel distant from God. And He felt it with us. He prayed that song that really you and I sing. But He sang it too. He entered into our emotional impact of estrangement. And He prayed the psalm that will lead you out of it. Jesus enters into our dreadful experience of estrangement so that He can lead us on the way out of it. He had this feeling too. And what did He do with it? He prayed about it. That's what that song is for. It gives expression to that. You know, sometimes when we get there, the last thing that we want to do is to spend any time with God. We feel so alone and so stripped and so bare and so abandoned. Have you been there? Where you're just feeling, God, if you loved me, why would this happen? If you loved me, why did you let them do that to me? If you loved them, why did you let this happen to this person I love so much? Have you been there? Where you feel, and Jesus is saying, yeah, I'm with you. Now follow me. And what did I do? I prayed in the worst moment of my life. When things were dreadful and awful, I cried out to God. I told Him the truth about what I was experiencing. I didn't hide any of it. That psalm is not a psalm that hides. Read it. It's Psalm 22. And it doesn't pretend and it doesn't mince words about the emotional impact of devastating days. It tells God the truth. And that's what Jesus did from the cross. And He's teaching you to do it too. He's saying when everything collapses on you and you don't want to pray, pray. When you don't want to do the discipleship thing, He says, I know. I've been where you are. In fact, what happened to me was worse. Unless you are actually being executed, which in this world I suppose happens. But unless you are actually being executed, then what happened to Jesus is worse than what will happen to you on your worst day. So at your worst time, you can lock eyes with Him and He can say, I know. I've been there. I've experienced it. And it hurts. And it's awful. And pray anyway. Pray it out. Let God have your disappointment with Him. Let God have your confusion. Let God have what is disturbing you and just give it to Him. Because while you don't know what to do with it, He does. The heart that turns to God in crisis is a heart that survives crisis, even if the crisis kills him. I know that because I lock my eyes on Jesus and I see what He did. And in the worst moment of His life, He poured it out to God to teach us to do the same thing. You know, whatever is happening with the theology of God and the sin and the cross and whether He turned His back on Him or not, I don't know. But I know this. Jesus was teaching you. He was teaching you to keep loving God even when it's hard. Because it's worth doing. At the end of things, you'll be able to trust Him. Jesus' very last moment, recorded here by Luke, is this. Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And having said that, He breathed His last. That is an act of trust by a man who felt abandoned. In the worst moment of his life, he cries out with trust. You know, the thing is, what will you trust to people? And think about that. What do you commit to others? I guess it depends on how trustworthy you think they are, right? There are some people to whom you'll commit quarters, and that's about it. You know, some people can have your more personal treasures. Some people you'll invite into your life to share the most intimate things that you are. But to whom do you commit your spirit? I mean, you're not there talking about things, or even your kids. You're talking about yourself. You're talking about and by your spirit, you don't just mean your life even. Because what do you believe about biology versus spirit? When the biology fails and it stops working, do you think your spirit does? No, you don't. And the Christian will teach you that we are made of better stuff than this. Eternal stuff. So what is he talking? He's talking about his eternal self. Now with what? With whom would you trust that? Certainly not somebody that experience had taught you was bad. And if anyone would say, you know, I think God is bad, it ought to be him. You know, it ought to be him. Because in this moment, everything bad's happened to him. You know, everyone that loved him ran away. And he went through a miscarriage of justice. There was no fairness in what happened. And he had pain upon pain upon pain. By this time, he had been tortured for 6 hours. And he knew that he was at the end of his life. He knew it. He knew it. His body was giving out. It was done. And with his dying breath, he expressed ultimate trust. God, you are worthy of committing my spirit to. I give it to you. I trust you to take care of this. I know that I am dying, and here in my death, I express trust. Good night. How do you do that? Well, folks, this is not the first time he's done that. He didn't begin in his dying moment. He began trusting God throughout his life. The whole time. Every moment. All those times when he retreated off to pray is because he's building that trust. He's building that relationship. He knows as a man, as a human being, he knows that God is trustworthy. And he's seen him get him through trouble after trouble after trouble. He knows God's plan is resurrection. And he's not seen that. He's seen people come back from the dead at his word. But here, there's no one to raise him but God himself. And he goes, I trust you to keep your word. And I commit to you my spirit. Here you go. By the end of his life, the last moment of his life is ultimate trust in God. Okay, well, that's because he's built it all this time. For us, he's teaching us, trust God all the time. Organize and arrange your life in such a way, because the hours of your life, the days of your life come. And how are you using them? Because believe it or not, you also will have a final breath. If the Lord does not come during your lifetime, and if you've heard me pray, you know that I hope He does. I mean, I hope today would be good. I'd be all right with that. But you know, if it's not today, if it's not tomorrow, and if it's not for 500 years, I don't care what they do with health care. I don't think any of us will be here, do you? So you're going to have a final breath. You're preparing for how you will use it right now. Every moment of your life prepares you for what will that final moment be. And will you, in that final moment, be able to say, God, you were worthy of my trust. You were worth it all. I'd do it all again, even as bad as it's turned out sometimes, because I trust you. I have committed to you everything. And folks, some of those hours, some of those days are going to be Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani days. The hard day will come when you will have to cry out, where are you? I need you and I don't feel you at all. I feel so alone right now. I feel so abandoned. Pray about it then. Follow Jesus' teaching on the cross. Do as He did. Keep your eyes fixed on Him, and He will help you to do it. But most of these days are not Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani days. Almost went to like lama mad at mama for a second. Most of them are not going to be those rough, terrible, awful days. So you arrange your days to prepare for them. You use your time in ways that build your trust. It's why it's important that you come here. It's why it's important that you gather together with us. To have a rhythm in your life where you sing these songs and you eat this food. It's why we do this. It's why it's important that you join with what this group does outside of this time. It's why the ladies' retreat that happened last weekend, why that was so important. Why is that so? Why does it matter so much? Did lightning strike and an angel show up, or Jesus Himself walk in through the door? Well, in a sense, yes, Jesus was there wherever two or more are gathered together. But His body didn't walk in through the door. It wasn't that dramatic. It wasn't that stunning. But why was it important? Because you are preparing your life for Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. You arrange and structure your life in prayer, in worship, in attention to God. And if you will do that, when Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani comes, it won't threaten, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. You'll be able to make it through that to the other side and still be able to trust God. That's what He's teaching us. That on the dramatically awful day, you can still trust Him. But you will do that on the dramatically awful day because you have done it on the not dramatically awful day. You have done it over and over and over again. And when the dramatically awful day came, you continued to do what you'd practiced. You keep going. You keep praying. You keep singing Psalm 22. And you follow Jesus into trust. Folks, He could trust Jesus, He could trust His Father while on the cross. What an amazing man. And He can teach you to do it too. Fix your eyes upon Jesus. And then, whatever comes, whether it's wonderful or hard, whether it's someone being rude and awful to you or someone laughing at your side, you also will make it through because He did. You'll follow Him through the hard time to the other side, and He will save you from the Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani days. He will rescue you when it's hard because He's been there, and He can lead you through it. Where are you with this? As you look into your own pattern of life, are you living in a rhythm that will get you ready for your last breath? Have you dedicated yourself to being close to Him and following Him? Is your life marked by that? If you look over your calendar, look at your planner, your day timer, is it filled with stuff where you intentionally are drawing near to God, working for God, dedicated to God, so that you can commit to Him everything when it counts? Are you in an Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani moment? Goodness knows we've been there. And we weren't alone, because someone else has been there too. And I don't just mean us. I mean the body that we are. Christ Himself has been there. You are not alone. No matter what you feel, you are not abandoned and alone, because He drew near to you in your abandonment so He can get you through it. Are you there right now? Do you need us? Do you need us to love you and be good to you? We want to be. Let us know. We'll cry out beside you in prayer. And if you can't pray, we'll pray your prayers for you until you can. Did you come here today carrying a burden that has nothing to do with what I've talked about, but you need to lay it down? Don't carry it out of here, at least not alone. Let us help you pick it up. And if you are not a Christian, there's water right here. That man gave everything so that you can have everything. And He wants you for Himself, and whether you know it or not, you want Him too. There's no better way of life than following that man. And we'll wait on lunch for that. You know, if this morning you were subject to the invitation of God, why don't you come right now while we stand and sing?